Welcome to Kitchen Conversations. We have Lauran Thomas here today with us, who is our wonderful mental health therapist. And it's so great to have you, Lauran, because people have had all sorts of questions on parenting and marriage, and so many of them stem from just dealing with pain and how do we deal with our pain and our suffering and our disappointment. So thank you so much for joining us, because we're going to get to all those fun topics today.
You're welcome. It's fun to be here.
Great. Well, we'll dive in. So we'll start off with the first woman's questions who she's dealing with her child who is just struggling being online virtually. And just the other day, basically just told her that she doubts God and where's God in all this. And just as a mom, she's feeling so lost on how to care for her child and the best way to go about that. So what advice do you have?
I don't know if my advice is right because we're walking this new space all together. So I'll just say I'm learning as I go, also in just understanding what we know about people's emotions and their mental health and how to care for one another. And then going, okay, and now how to do it in this new space. So I don't claim to know everything about this because I am walking it. But what I get, I guess, that other people don't get, the benefit is that I'm walking this every day with people who are being vulnerable with me with their emotions. And so we're getting to kind of walk out how to do this in a way that supports their emotional health. So one of the first things with teens is, oh goodness, I think I said this to you earlier, so I'll kind of make it as a joke, but when we parents try to make them feel better by saying, it will get better, we're going to get through this, and it's like encouragement, the thing that we would do to our sister that we would really want from our sister. With a teen, we probably are going to get more like an eye roll. And so I really just encourage parents when your teens are hurting, when they have questions, but you really just don't have the answers because you yourself are not equipped. Sit with them, empathize with them, let them be hurt, let them feel anger, let them feel what they're going through. And then the next step is acceptance. Yeah, this place that we're in, it just stinks and it's unfair and we don't like it. But it is where we are. And so then once we get to that place and we've sat with those emotions and we've kind of let them cry or be mad on our shoulder without trying to fix it, then we can start talking about, okay, what does acceptance look like? And acceptance is a practice. It's saying, I really don't have control. And so it's giving that space to say, I don't have it, even though I don't like what the situation that I'm in. I'm not then going to be able to control the outcome because the situation is out of my control. So how do I accept a situation I don't like and embrace what we feel and then shift your thought process? So shift to going, okay, this problem's not solvable. Right? Because the situation's out of our control. So it's not a solvable problem, which means we have to shift our perspective. So, the situation's really bad. Okay, we're in virtual learning, and I don't really like that I don't get to see my friends, or I don't really like that I'm sitting in front of a computer way too many hours in a day for my mental health. But that is my situation. So what can I shift my perspective to so that I can at least be present in the moment? Do I like the science class that I'm in right now? Okay, I'm going to just engage that I like the subject that we're talking about, even though I don't like the delivery. Right? So it's just a perspective shift because you can't change the situation. So that's kind of the beginning thought that I have.
Well, and what if you have a lot of things that you don't like? What if you're not liking the science class either? So give some more examples. I feel like women could use a few examples right now.
I was, I'll be honest, my intern and I have just been in this constant conversation about how do we support teens in virtual, in virtual school, because it's not something they're used to. and especially when we have teens that are struggling with focus issues. And it's not just not liking it, but like learning this way is actually really hard for me and having a difficult time just being engaged with it. And so we're coming up with like creative things that we're doing in terms of what do we have in our hands when we're learning, right? So fidget things. I know that this was a whole topic, a few years ago when those fidget spinners came out.
Mhm.
And they drove teachers, I think, crazy because they were distracting to the class. But now we don't have that problem. And so we are actually talking with our kids about like, okay, so you don't like what you're doing right now, but do you like playing with putty? Do you like molding something with your hands while you're trying to listen? Do you like the idea, right? And this is where we can even get future oriented, right? Going to our dreams and our hopes. Not that we want to live in the future, but we also don't want to lose sight that we are in school for a bigger purpose, right? It's not just for today. It's actually because we have dreams and we have desires and we have hopes for what it's going to look like later in our life. And so sometimes it's about going, okay, I don't really like where I'm sitting right now, but I have to get through this discomfort so that I can get to where I want to go. And so sometimes it's about giving yourself permission to dream. Hey, what are you going to do after this day? Like, what are you doing after this class that you're not really enjoying?
Mm.
Developing a bucket list with our kids, like going, okay, what is our afternoons going to look like so that we have something to look forward to? I know that we as parents a year ago might have said is, oh, hey, don't forget you've got soccer practice, or don't forget you've got dance class, or don't forget you've got theater to look forward to. Okay, we're having to get creative because not all of our kids are not having those things. So we're going to have to get really creative with what we are going to be able to do when the day is over. What is something that you enjoy, so that you can get through the discomfort of what you don't enjoy? And I think the other thing is accepting where we are doesn't mean we have to like it. Um, there's a lot of things that many of us don't like, but accepting it doesn't mean, oh, well, if I accept it, then I'm saying I'm okay with it and it's going to be fine. No, so it's okay to say I accept that this is where I am and I don't like it.
That's good. I feel a lot of people could use that. So talk more about accepting, because I'm sure a lot of people struggle with accepting where they are in their lives. So what are some other tools you have for our toolbox on ways that we can do that?
Acceptance is actually a little bit more existential, right? That's a little bit different than like what I typically do, which is more cognitive behavioral, and that's where our toolbox just gets totally filled up. But acceptance is actually a practice, and so when we turn it into a space of how we practice our thinking, that's the best thing you do. So there's not as much tangible that we can grab and say, oh, well, if I write in my journal, then I'm going to accept it more, right? That's a little different. But more acceptance looks like I'm going to sit in the space of discomfort and say, I am uncomfortable right now. I really am not enjoying where I'm sitting. And I recognize this will not last forever, right? I do not get to predict how long it will last, but I am in faith sitting in a place to say, every day changes. I was just outside and I was looking at the changing of the season, and it reminded me, like, right, life is not stagnant. We don't get stuck in one place and that is where we are forever. And so sometimes acceptance says there have been other things in life that have not been good, or that have been hard, or have been painful. And either I have gotten through them, or I have seen someone else get through them, or history tells me that it will change. And so sometimes acceptance says, I don't have an answer for today, but I'm going to have faith that every day is new. And that there will be a change, even if that change is not something I can even foresee. Like, right, I don't know the plan.
Yeah.
But I know that the plan is changing, right, in my life. Like, today's the Today, this moment is the only moment that I will feel this exact way.
Mm. Yeah, that could definitely help. Yeah, God's mercies are new each morning. I go to that a lot.
Right. Yeah.
So, so speaking of kids, because we had a few on these questions about our kids too, and like, how do they make friends during this time, right? When they're feeling very isolated themselves, and how can we give them that feeling of not being alone?
Every family in this situation is going to be really different. And so I respect and I appreciate both sides of the spectrum of how you want to walk in this space of COVID. Um, because, but everyone is different. So we can sit in the space of saying, some people have given themselves permission to say, within this small group of people, we're going to connect. And so one of the things is school used to be just the typical way that we assumed our children would make friends. We send them to school. That's where they're going to connect. That's where they're going to make friends. And, we watch that. Okay, my work is done. Right. Develop relationships, go. But really, when we look at it, more than not, kids don't always make friends in school. And so some parents are already have been faced with this. And so we can pull from what we already know. We already know that big groups don't work for a lot of kids. Okay, so that means school is going to be actually a hard place to make friends. We also know that finding like interests is something that connects our kids. And so we have to actually get creative and maybe help our kids by saying, yes, you don't have school to make friends, but where can we search and seek to develop relationships? I have teens right now that are making friends. Is it as many friends as they would want, or that they have in their mind like, oh, I should have this many friends? Because at school you have 30 people in your class to choose from. Well, but that might be an expectation that we have to tamper a little bit so that we can live in the space that we are. So, what if you had one or two friends? I know youth groups are happening out there, whether it be virtual or whether it be small groups. I know a lot of churches, I've really heard about how churches are, I mean, I know need to be one of them, where their small groups are actually meeting in very small situations. But that is actually building intimacy. It's building connectedness. I have kids that are actually playing sports, right? The sports look different. It's not high school. It's not their typical maybe travel team that they were on, but they are able to engage. I have kids that are actually trying new activities. There's a lot of art that is happening. There's tennis, that there's certain things that are happening. And so I think one of the ways we can develop friends is, one, as moms, how can we reach out to other moms that have like age children? So that means we actually do have to put a little bit more, because our children are just going to naturally at this stage go to the internet, right? Because that's their go-to right now. That's a safe place. We have to decide if that's where we want them to make their friends. But it does look different. And it does take a little bit more effort. One of the things is also like meetup groups, going for a walk. Okay, that might have been different, right? We might not, I mean, I even know my 10-year-old was going for walks with kids. That would have not have been her activity of choice.
Yeah.
But it gave her the ability to see a friend because it's something you could social distance and do.
Right. And it gets them off the internet.
Right.
So
Yeah.
exactly. We were talking about expectations too. And so there was one mom who, she's a single mom, and so she's struggling because she just feels she's failing at everything with, working and not being able to be there full time for her kids to be online and school. And she feels she's going to get the nasty letters from the school soon. And, the wash is piling up, all that stuff's going on. And she's just feeling very hopeless. So take it away.
Just my heart hurts, right? Because we are all probably finding ourselves in a position of something in our life feels hopeless, something that we it's outside of our comfort zone. It's outside of our norm. We maybe weren't designed, right, to be a full-time person who works while we're trying to educate our kids. Maybe we don't even know technology. Trying to help our kids log on causes us an immense amount of stress. And I guess I've been trying to find the space to say, we're not made to be everything, right? The only one that can be everything is God, right? He's the only one that has that role. And we don't have that, right? We have specific gifts, we have specific talents, and that's because he made us that way so that we could support one another. And so that hopeless space might be, I don't know this person, but it might have something to do with expectation management. It might have to do with what pressures and expectations are you putting on yourself that says you should be able to do it all correctly 100% of the time. And is that getting in your way of connecting with the things that you actually are capable and are your strengths? I don't have the feeling, and I'll give you a little background of me. We lived overseas, and so my daughter she missed all of that American preschool. So she was actually in German school from 3 to 6. And I'll tell you, that space of feeling inadequate when all of my American friends were talking about their children reading at the age of 4, at the age of 5. And I'm going, oh my gosh, that we are not like, I'm good if I can get the ABCs in English and in German, right? I mean, like, that's not where we were. And it took some soul searching for me to release those expectations that lined up with a cultural norm versus what our family's desires and what do we want to be prioritized in our family. Okay, so we decided I would much rather my daughter have an ability to learn a new language than try to stay up with teaching her to read when her little brain was just overwhelmed with learning this new language. And that was a decision we had to make. But I definitely felt inadequate. I felt like I wasn't meeting the expectations. And that was only because I was seeing her same age kids in America doing different things. I think that we kind of, when I pull back and I go, okay, that might be what we are experiencing also now, and just in a different way. The comparison of everybody else has got this together and I am just falling apart. Where is that comparison coming from? I don't know.
Nobody all has it together.
Right, exactly. But there's something in us that starts feeding this comparison. And so I would say to this mom, I would say, pick 1 or 2 things you would like to emphasize and focus on with your children. And if that's not sitting in front of the computer because they're just losing it and it is causing family distress, what do you value more? Do you value connectedness and love and sharing as a family? Or do you value an academic education that with time, potentially she or he can get in a different way if this way isn't working? Yeah. Because this time is not forever, right? We know there is end somewhere to the not being in school. At some point, we will be back in school. That's my hope. And if we look at science and if we look at history, that will happen, right? And so I guess I have told parents, what's the worst thing if your kid doesn't sit through kindergarten at 5? I mean, and I asked that question, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen?
That is good to play out in our minds, because if we don't think through that, we always think it's something catastrophic. Whereas really, normally, I mean, what's the worst thing? They have to repeat a grade at some point, no big deal. It seems like a big deal, but in the big scheme of things,
And I think that's where we have to look is that my belief is God has the big picture. I don't have the big picture. So if I'm going to put my trust in him, I'm going to have to say, I trust that you're going to help me walk through my small picture.
Mm, yeah.
And and so that's why that worst case scenario question, I ask it often because it's such a good one. I think it makes us really stop, and it makes us pause and get out of our fret and our worry.
Hmm.
And yeah, address it. I think sometimes people avoid it.
Yeah.
What's the worst thing that can happen?
Hmm.
I mean, you take any situation that you're in, you know, you get a bad letter, this mom's question, right? I think had something to do with a bad note from the school. What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
I mean, it really is it stops, I think, our over functioning and pauses, which is what a lot of times when we're in that hopeless space of fret, we need to pause.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, I like that. It's a good thing to implement. And people, here's the thing, I mean, people, it feels so real and genuine to them that it's really sometimes hard to get out of that. So do you have some more ideas of how, when our minds are just racing with all these, when we're feeling that stress and all of that stuff, what else, what other good stuff do you have for us too? Because I know you have all these great things that we can practice.
I think that when we are in that room, we call it rumination, right? So in therapy, you would hear you're ruminating over in your thoughts, right? And so it's almost like a tape recorder is on play, and and so there's activation that has to happen that says I choose to pause my tape recorder and I choose to re-engage my tape recorder in a different way, right? Because that's what our thoughts are, or is it's our thoughts are going, right? They're moving, they're active. Some techniques I actually just sent it to someone this morning is it's easy, right? Some of these things are simple and we actually think that they're maybe useless. So I'll just go ahead and put that out there. Like a therapist throws out a technique and somebody's like, yeah, that won't work for me. Um, right? Because we have a disbelief. We have a disbelief that this issue that we're experiencing, this thought rumination, uh, that won't work for me. It won't go away, right? But that's part of your rumination. You're telling yourself that it won't get better, that won't be helped. So, an easy breathing one, and I think I've even shared this at some point, but because I just shared it this morning with someone, is it's called 478. And so you take a deep breath in and you count to 4 as you inhale. You hold your breath for 7, and then you exhale for 8. One of the coolest things with this is that if you actually do it and you're counting,
Mhm.
you're engaging a logic space of your brain. We can't have actually two thoughts happening at one time.
Mm.
If you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're actually doing it, thoughts start to slow down because you're focusing on the numbers.
Mm.
That also means our emotions are coming down, right? Because the intensity of our anxiety, our heart rate, all of that. So it starts to just kind of relax you to a point. You do that, and they call for us to do it for 3 cycles. One, because we don't want to pass out from holding our breath, but 2, 3 cycles really actually begins to reduce your heart rate. And then you give space to say, what is it that I want to think on right now?
Mm.
Right? We know that verse, take every thought captive. That's a great verse. How do we do it?
Yeah.
Right? The best way is to actually slow down so that we can then make active choice.
Mm.
So that's one skill. Um, I call it brain dumping. You can call it whatever you want to call it. Um, but giving space to your thoughts. So not saying, gosh, I'm just so sick of thinking like this. I just want to get rid of it. Right? That's a fix. That's trying to like solve a problem when there actually might not be a problem to solve. It might be a discomfort and you actually have to be in the discomfort, the pain or the hurt. And so brain dumping is a way of getting it out. So almost giving energy to the thought so that you go, I'm going to give you space right now. I'm not going to let you control me because I'm taking action. And then I start brain dumping, but I just write out my thoughts. So you can, some people, especially kids, they're not going to write, but they can draw. And so kids are really good with that, right? Just draw what you're thinking about. And the amazing pictures that you will get from this is really interesting. Well, we as adults can do the same thing. Um, Draw out what you're thinking. Legos. Hey, let's build something that represents your thoughts. Parents, we can do this too. We can use modeling clay, right? Like, what are you experiencing right now? Let's represent that in your clay. So these are like play therapy ideas, but some of it is the idea is that we want to not just submit to the thought. We want to activate ourselves by making choice within the thought. And so once we dump it and we see it, whether it be in a figure or a painting or written, then we go through it and we say, then we can challenge those thoughts and we can say, okay, so what is true? And then that gives us space. So we can, right, as Christians, then we challenge our thoughts with truth from the word. And if you don't have faith, then you challenge your thoughts based on your value structure. And so is it lining up with truth? And then you get to say, well, if it's not, then what do I want to change that thought to? Mm-hmm. But it's a process. And I think that one of the things that we as humans, we want things to happen like that. We want it to be fixed immediately.
Yes. Always. Always. Instant gratification. We've learned it so well.
Right. For sure. For sure. You know, I'm a retired military spouse. And with the military, right, it's 100%, right? They are expected in their jobs to give 100%. Sometimes as spouses, we're expected to give 100% for their job. But somewhere along my husband's career, he had a commanding officer talk to him about good enough. And the context of it was something in the military. And I took that concept and I sat with it and I really thought on it. And I said, when do we in our culture give ourselves permission to say good enough? Like 80% is okay. Mm. Right? If we are always pressing and pressing to get to 100 or over 100, where's our bandwidth? Like, where is the space to pause and to stop and to think about challenging thoughts? If we're always pressing up to that moment that we're going to the next thing.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's why some of these things are all coming to the surface now, because we have a little more time to sit and we're not racing around to a million things. We're like, ooh, I'm still feeling that discomfort or that pain or that, why is that flaring up now all of a sudden? And yeah.
It's almost like we're being
recognize it.
Yeah. And one of the parts of acceptance with our feelings and really realizing that circumstance of where we are is what you just described is called avoidance.
We're really good at avoidance sometimes.
Right. And when we really get to that place and we break down emotional discomfort and how we deal, it's that suffering in our emotions is extended the longer we avoid dealing with how we feel.
Ooh, you should probably repeat that for people to hear again.
Okay. So suffering is extended the longer we avoid dealing with how we feel.
So, wow. So then for all that emotional pain, because people have so much emotional pain based off of so many different circumstances, could you go there and help us with that one? Because, it's very real.
So emotional pain is something that we're not geared to talk about, to sit with, to even express to our friends, right? Like, it's like, oh, and even with our kids, we think about this. Like, when our children fall, and get like a scraped knee. It's a physical pain. We know how to respond, react, put a bandage. We know how to kind of deal with that. If it's too much for us, we take them to the hospital, right? But that's a physical pain. And really learning how to look inward and understand that emotional pain happens more often than physical pain. It's what we wash away, right? It's kind of like that. I'm probably the most guilty of telling my daughter, "Oh, get over it." Like get over it, as in like typically a physical pain, right? Like brush it off, dust it off, keep going. My nickname with my children is called Mama Tough Love. Um, because I'm kind of like a brush it off kind of mom. As my daughter's entering into pre-puberty, can't believe I'm even saying that at 10, which is true.
We'll pray for you.
Please, please. It's that I'm actually learning that brush it off, right, doesn't work with emotional pain. It works with physical pain when our kids just need attention. Because we're trying to build resiliency and grit, right? But brushing off emotional pain is really different. And so if I then don't acknowledge an emotional discomfort as something real and hard and kind of really shifting for me, right? Like so I can be hurt by a friend, and if I just blow it off and I don't address that, wow, that really stung when so and so disregarded what I said, right? Like, if I just blow that off, then I'm not giving permission to look at self and say, wait, that stung. Okay. How do I deal with that sting? Do I address my friend? Do I just sit with it and realize she could have been having a bad day and it's not even really worth it? And I have to figure that out. And I use that word sting because that is what my experience is, right? It's more like a sting. It's unexpected, and I'm a little shocked by it. And so sometimes those emotions are like stings. But then when we think about like a bee sting, it continues. That pain of a bee sting kind of continues. It just lessens. And that's really the same thing with emotional pain, is that if we avoid it, it's almost like the intensity just gets hidden and it will come out somewhere else. But if we actually sit with that emotional pain and we go, gosh, that really stings, or that really, that really hurt when that person said this to me. Okay, what do I want to do with that? And is that truth for me? Just because they said it doesn't mean it's true. And then I sit there, that sting starts to lessen, which means the intensity of my pain lessens. And then it means I actually can move forward and not get stuck or have it come out in a different way later. But the word sitting with our emotions is probably the one that a therapist can use. And someone might say, okay, what does that mean? I'm just used to being busy and go and avoiding that space. Sitting with it means addressing it. Where did it come from? Right? I was sitting with someone, and the word that came out is like, oh, I felt scolded by what you said. And that was something that came out. And I just had to say, when else have you felt scolded? So sometimes our pain is looking at where the trigger of that pain comes from. Is that connecting?
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us.
Yeah. Well, and so when we go there, right? When we go there, sometimes it is past relationship hurts that we haven't dealt with. Sometimes it's our upbringing that was done with the best intentions, but didn't turn out the way that maybe our parents wanted in certain situations. Sometimes it's that we, in our personality structure, we internalize things and are more tender and sensitive to certain things than other people. And so it's something we actually have to just look at within ourselves and say, this is who I am. That wasn't their intention. But it's really looking at, if I'm triggered by an emotional situation, is that in this relationship or is that from something in my past? And do I need to actually dig in and look at it?
Yeah.
And that's how we use that term, right? We don't live in our past, but we learn from it.
Right. So if you're reflecting and you kind of come across what it might be, then how do you deal with that? What is the next step?
If it's with another person, straight forgiveness. Right? Because now we can't go back and change it. We can look at it through a lens of we can tell ourselves they had negative intentions by that hurt, or they didn't have negative intentions. Because we can't go back and relive it and we can't change it, we get to choose how we want to view it. And so then we can say, oh, so in this situation, it might not have actually been as difficult as I'm experiencing it, but I'm experiencing it this intensely because of something that I hadn't dealt with. And so then I go and I address it. Sometimes it's actually, I mean, self-disclosure, I don't have any problem with that. But I remember one of the best things a therapist can do is to go to therapy. So in my program at Johns Hopkins, in your last year, you're required were required, I don't know what they do now, but that you go to some form of therapy just to kind of, understand what it feels like to sit on the other side and to make sure you don't have baggage that's going to get in the way of you really helping someone. And so I do remember sitting in therapy and I was, I don't know, maybe 24. And I got out of the session and I called my mom and I was like, this is your fault. And I'm sure I didn't do it with grace. I'm sure I did not do it with grace. But I'm like, you didn't teach me how to fail. Like, and so a hurt that I was having at 24 that was, very surface in what I thought, but it was becoming bigger because I had failed something that I didn't, I had not really failed much in my life. And I did. I was like, you didn't teach me how to fail. And she's like caught off guard. But it was that I really actually needed to go deal with that past. I didn't really need to tell her that yet. But I could have said something to her later, like, I'm learning something that was really impacting me is that the way I was raised and my experiences, I didn't have enough opportunities to understand failure. And that was about me versus you didn't do, something right. But that's how we kind of address it, is that instead of going to the person immediately, we actually sit with it, which is what I did wrong. and then it's okay to say to that person, wow, I'm learning something, especially if it's someone you're close to. Wow, I'm learning something about the impact of this in my present. And I just wanted to share that with you, but not because I can do anything about it now, but I can learn from it.
Well, and you brought up a good point about forgiveness too. And a lot of people struggle with truly forgiving people, and we're called to forgive, over and over. What tools do you have for that on how people can forgive those who have hurt them?
I will quote Judy Rossi because I love her and because this is so true, right? She talks so much. A quote is not the right word, but I will use her in this, is that she talks about that 90-degree relationship. So it's like a 90-degree angle, and my angle up is with my relationship with God and my angle out is with others. That's probably been the most eye-opening thing. And even as a therapist, to be able to look at and to say, and it's like a challenging space to say, okay, we're getting stuck in a space of forgiveness. I don't feel like I have forgiven them. Well, I would say that goes back to that 90-degree relationship. And it says, well, have you talked to God about this one? Have you gone to him and asked for forgiveness in your heart for the space that's keeping you stuck? And that comes out a good bit in therapy, is this, I don't feel like I have forgiven them. Well, I'm not quite sure what feeling comes along with forgiveness, except what the Bible says, which is a space of peace and contentment. But I guess it really doesn't say that that means I then like them, or that we're going to be best friends, or that they have to be in my life. And I think maybe there's some misconceptions that forgiveness means relationship. And I don't see it that way. I think forgiveness means that I've made it right between me and God, and I have forgiven outwardly, and He's responsible for what that relationship happens after that.
That's a good one. And so, that comes up too in marriage. A lot of people have that questions about forgiving the hurts of their spouse and stuff like that. And so maybe you can talk more on that too. And then speaking of marriage, one of the questions too was, if their husband and them are spiritually mismatched, what advice do you have?
So I think there's two lenses, that space of mismatched. I think there's two lenses. One lens would be, did we get married and I knew I was a Christian and my spouse was not? And that was a choice I made. And then the other lens is, did we get married and neither of us were believers and I became a believer after I was married? That first one, I'm going to give that to a pastor, and I'm not going to take that one. Or it would take a lot more digging in, I have to say. But the second one, the lens of like, oh, we got married, non-believers, and I became a believer and my spouse did not, then I would say, okay, that's when the only thing, your only responsibility for your spouse is prayer. You're not responsible for their salvation. You're not responsible for if they choose this path or not, but you are responsible for praying for their salvation and being a witness, right? Like, how do I witness my faith to my spouse without nagging them to get on board? And I think that that's the hard part, right? It means you still go to church, or you still join in fellowship with your brothers and sisters, and you invite, and then you let God do the rest. That space of mismatched, in the marriage, it causes a lot of discomfort. It causes a lot of marital discord. One of the things is, in marriages, communication is about understanding, right? And so in a marriage, our goal is not to convince or to change the mind of our spouse on a topic. But what we desire is to understand them and for them to understand us. And so some of this might look like communication. It might look like, I really want to share with you what's going on for me so that you can understand where I am, because I want you to know me wholeheartedly. But that's just about you. That's not about you doing anything to change them.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Since people always want to change the other party. But communication is such a good point, and I think a lot of people really still struggle with that too. So what are some other good tips so that, the nagging stops and the communication begins?
I love this conversation. I could talk on it for hours. Mainly because I definitely now am being guided by God in a direction of marriage, to a greater level of marriage work. And so I've been doing a lot of studying, and it's kind of a growth point, right? That's that part of stagnation. Like, okay, I've been practicing for over 15 years. I could just keep doing only what I'm doing. But as a therapist, I would be really missing out on opportunities to serve and to help others to a greater level. Communication is interesting. And so one of the things I think to think about is that conflict in marriage is normal. Conflict is going to happen. How in the world could we bring two people together who have different personalities, different upbringings, different values, and assume that those two people are just going to get along in a space of joy every day. Right? So I think I want you to, if you hear nothing else from me, I want you to hear conflict is normal. um, but the conflict space is saying, how do we talk within our conflict? How do we dialogue with one another in love, in truth, in respect, in honesty? How do we do that? Well, the best thing, and I will have to use a little research here, but the research shows through Gottman's research, it says the first 3 minutes of a conversation dictate if it's going to be a healthy or an unhealthy, and it will also predict how the end of the conversation goes. So, wow, when I hold that and I go, oh, wow, that's been studied, right? That's not just like Lauran coming up with something kind of fun to think about. It then tells me, okay, so how do I start that up? How do I begin a conversation, especially one where I've got some hurts and where I feel that I have been disrespected, or where I feel that this is not how we have chosen to live in our house, like these bigger things, right? So the best thing I would start with is going, how would you like to be spoken to? Would you like to be blamed? Would you like to be accused? Would you like to be told you're not doing it good enough? Would you receive that really well? Not me. I would get my boxing gloves on and I would become super defensive, and I would start saying why all my ways are right. And so, right? I mean that's just who we are, right? When someone attacks us, our natural instinct is to defend. Some other things that might happen is that if we feel attacked, we shut down. Well, shutting down is just stonewalling a conversation. It's saying, I'm not giving you any of this. Well, that's not really healthy either. So what we can do is we can discuss what our experience is by talking about self and not about the other person. We can talk about our dissatisfaction without blaming. There was a great example, and so I'll share it. It was about parenting. It was like, you don't ever help out with the kid. Okay, that was the wife talking to the husband. Okay, that statement right there would instantly cause either the husband to walk away and say whatever, or it would cause him to get defensive and to talk about what she's not doing. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to get into a tit for tat.
Right.
Right. But what would work there is to say, I feel like I'm not only one chasing around the kid today. I really could use some help.
Ooh.
And there's not many people who care about the other person, right? Whether you are even in a place of discord, just because we're in conflict doesn't mean we lose respect and we lose love. It just means right now we're in a space of just angst with one another. I just can't tell you how if someone said, I really could use your help after saying something that was overwhelming, I would definitely want to step up.
Yeah. It is so much in the approach we take.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, I like those. Give us more examples of that. What we're saying wrong and how we can say it better.
All right. I need some. I'm having to like dig right now because I've got so many.
Okay, you don't have to come up with them all at once. We'll just let you post them below. Instead of this, try this.
Yeah. You make me feel is one of the biggest ones. That's a no-no, right? You make me feel so mad. I am feeling mad right now because I don't feel connected with you. Right. Yeah. That you make me feel is one that pops out a lot. And so all we had to do right there is to shift it to I feel. when we start explaining our experience, that's another way to do it, and that was what I did in the first one, explaining what I'm going through. I've had such a hard day right now and I am just burned out. Is there any way you could share in the bedtime routine tonight? Mm. Right? That instead of going, I'm done, you got to do bedtime, right?
Yes, I think there were a few years where I stayed home, and when my husband would walk in the door, it was like I would want to yes, you were just done, right? But those approaches would have been extremely helpful.
Well, and it's not even the we're not going to always get it right, and I think that's what we remember is that how would I want to start this conversation, because my desire is at the end of the conversation I am supported. Right? That's what I'm looking for. Right. And so it's about how am I going to do that? And sometimes it means I am playing it out before I say it. It means...
Oh, I think it was Juliana Mathers who said one time, nobody wants to come home to mad. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. Nobody wants to come home to mad. I don't want to come home to mad.
Right. Yeah. And I a lot of times last night was one of them. I worked late last night and I walked out and I'm like, okay, my husband had been doing homework, right? He had that. He was good. But then my daughter needed to share everything in her homework that she had already done with dad. And I was like, I am so done, right? I mean, I had spent, 7 or 8 hours talking with people. I really didn't want to listen to your homework. And so I had to say, and I do this with my daughter. So it's not just in marriages, it's how we also speak to our kids, because it's modeling, because what do we want for them? We want them to have healthy marriages and healthy relationships. So everything that we say is for our benefit and for those around us. And so I had to work on that. Instead of saying anything, I took a couple of deep breaths, turned around to the sink, started washing whatever I was doing for dinner. And I was like, hey, hon, could you give mommy 20 minutes? And then I would be really interested in hearing how you and daddy did homework. And instead of going, you've already done this, I don't need to hear it. I could have done that because that was how I felt.
Right.
Right. But that's also with our spouses, they walk in from work or we walk in from work, and one of us typically has more energy than the other. One of us is in a space, and that's something to pay attention in our marriage, is to say, before I emote is all my emotion comes at you, even if it's joy, even if it's excitement. Before I do that, let me read you. Let me see where you are right now, and let me check in with you before I just give you what I have. Even if that is good, right? Even if I'm so excited, hey, look at what I did today, I'm super thrilled. Let me check in with you, because you might not be in a place to meet me.
Yeah, that's a good point. Somebody once said too, who do you want to be when you walk in the door? And made you double check your door frame before you went in. Do I want to be the fun mom when I walk in? Or do I want to be the, and it does make you go, yeah, if I was being the best mom to my kids, what would that look like? Because it kind of makes us think about it before we just.
Okay, Michelle, because I love you, I'm going to do this, right? You're not even in a therapy session. I'm going to do it with you. You just put an expectation on yourself that is way outside the realm of good enough.
Yes, I could see me doing that. But you know what? When I do that, it's amazing. The different, and I think that's because that is the important thing in my life too, right? So I want to show up. I also think too, my mom died young, my dad had a massive stroke, so I want my kids to remember me being the fun mom, right? So it is kind of who do I want them to remember? Do I want them to remember the person who was, cranky, or do I want them to remember that we had special moments together? So, but if
so you can be
fun, it changes how I act.
And so you can be the fun mom, even if it's at 80%. right? Because 80% is better than cranky.
That is true. That is true. And me probably thinking about it means I'm probably running at the 80%, not the 100. It just means I walked in better than I would have had I not thought about it.
So very true. But that was because you paused, right? That was you paused and said, who am I going to be? How am I going to show up?
I think that's what it was. It was the pause. Because, a lot of times we're rushing through. I don't know. I find that in my life. So, just rushing through everything versus pausing to be in the moment. I struggle with in the moment. So give us more examples of how we live in the moment, because I know we have to go here soon, but I think probably a lot of people might appreciate some tips on being more in the moment.
So here's the technique that I use for in the moment. And I use it myself. If you've come to any of my talks, you've probably heard it, but it's the grounding technique for in the moment. So we are spinning with our to-do list. Okay, I'm spinning with my to-do list. And what's coming next? Okay, that does not give me the capacity to be present because I'm thinking ahead. And even if that's good, that's not, I have to make a time for planning versus constantly being in the next step. So when we do grounding, it really puts us in the moment. And this time of year is one of my favorite times to do it because of the fall. I love the change of the colors. I love the seasons. And it's like, oh, wow, what are 5 things I can see? What are 4 things I can touch? What are 3 things that I can smell? What are 2 things that I can hear? What's 1 thing that I can taste? What that does is it gets you in tune because we have 5 senses and most of us don't use them very often. We use typically either auditory or visual. And so what that does is that gets you going, what is right here happening at this very moment? That could be kids crying. But man, I'm so thankful that I have my kids, right? And so it's in that moment versus how do I get them to stop crying, right? Or like, oh, I've got like 5 different things to do in the next hour, but right now I just looked out my window and I saw the leaves are changing to yellow and I'm sitting here with Michelle and this is just a cool opportunity. I'm so thankful for it. But the senses is probably the best thing to get you into the moment, which means you have to use them. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Someone shared that with me one time that you had met with before, and I thought, oh, that is really cool. Because no matter what you're going through, if you start to notice all of those things, it really does change how you feel and how you're, changes a lot. So,
and I would say that probably going to prayer. I love the song by Jeremy Camp, Keep Me in the Moment. If you have not heard that song, Michelle, post it. It is like the best song in terms of like, I've got all this chaos going on in my life. Lord, I just want you to help me stay right where you have me. It's beautiful in the space of going the how. Okay, it's not easy. And life is big and it is full. But with his help, I can.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Lauran, for joining us today. And ladies, if you have more questions for her, email them to women@burkecommunity.com. We'll ask them anonymously. Or if you just want to post your question below. Thank you so much, Lauran, for joining us. Great.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye, ladies.